few hours to sort of give you guys this is how I like to teach. I can throw a lot of lectures and stuff like that at you in the conversation that we just had, but probably one of the best ways that I can sort of reiterate these comments and facts is to just give you an example of me doing it. So this isn't perfect. I haven't spent a week preparing this. I wrote it in the last 2 hours, but what I want you to pay attention for as I go through this is I want you to listen for the things that we just talked about: roadmap, introduction, transitions, connectives, and then how that information is presented. Okay, so those are the things I want you to take a roadmap of. So if you guys are like me, you've spent countless hours over the last few weeks scrolling on your phone, refreshing Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, trying to get more information, consuming information in regards to the missing person case of Gabi Petito. So unless you've been living under a rock, this topic isn't something that will probably be new to you. But in the event that you have, I'll give you a little bit of information. Gabi Petito was a 22-year-old woman living in Florida with her boyfriend, Brian Laundrie. Now, they decided to take a road trip out west where they took an old Ford Transit van that they had and they converted it into an RV. They wanted to visit all of these national parks and they were going to document it via their social media channels. They were trying to grow their influence. One of the things that Gabi Petito was doing was she was running a YouTube channel about RV life, our van life, where you take these old vans and you convert them and you can use them for camping and RVing. Now, the story took an interesting turn when Brian Laundrie returned home to Florida on September the 1st without Gabi. And her family says they hadn't heard from her for a few days at that point. They became suspicious and concerned because they weren't able to get in touch. Brian refused to talk. His family refused to talk. And it wasn't until approximately 10 days after he returned home to Florida that Gabi's family was actually able to file a missing persons report. Now, if you followed the story, you know that there is no happy ending, especially in this instance, that just a few days ago, Gabi Petito's body was found in a rural campsite in the Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming. Brian Laundrie is still missing. The police are actively looking for him even today. While Gabi Petito's story didn't have a happy ending, it does present an opportunity for us to examine some information about missing people and the process of missing persons. So, hi everybody, I'm Rick Curry, and today I'm going to be giving a speech about missing people and the process involved. We're going to talk about three key things. One, I'm going to give you a few statistics that maybe you haven't heard before regarding the number of people that go missing on any given year. Two, I want to shed a little bit of information on the process of what happens when someone actually files a missing persons police report and who can do that. And lastly, I'm going to end by sharing a little bit of a few resources locally here in Harris County in the event that you ever run across this where you might need to file a missing persons report. So let's get started. So step number one. The FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, now that's the top law enforcement agency in our country. They say that in 2020, 543,000 people went missing in our country. 543,000 people went missing here in the United States of America. Now, to put that number into perspective, if you're an Astros fan, you could fill Minute Maid Park to full capacity 13 times. If you're not an Astros fan, 543,000 people look something like the following. Take every person who lives in the city of Cypress, Tomball, Spring, and the Woodlands, Texas, and make them disappear. That's 543,000 people. That's a lot of people who went missing in 2020. Now, as shocking and of a statistic as that is, 543,000 people, that's actually a decrease from the 612,000 people who went missing in 2019 and the 647,000 people almost 100,000 more who went missing in 2018. So statistica.com, now that's an online database that compiles statistics gathered from federal agencies. They suggest that the 543,000 people missing in 2020 is actually the lowest number of people reported missing in our country since 1990. So that's a span of 31 years, during which time there's a 5-year period, 1994, 95, 96, 97, and 98. Each of those years, over 900,000 people were reported missing in each of those years alone. So collectively, if we look at the stats from 1990 to now, 31 years, over 14.9 million people have gone missing. That's a big number, but what does 14.9 million people look like? Well, we live in Texas, and if you're good with geography, you know we have a few geographic borders, states that border us. We have Louisiana to the east, we have New Mexico to the west, we have Oklahoma to the north, and Arkansas to the northeast. Louisiana has a population, according to Britannica, in 2020 of 4.6 million people, 3.9 million residents of Oklahoma, 2 million residents of New Mexico, and 2.9 million residents in Arkansas. 14.9 people, what does that look like? You could take the residents of each of those states, Louisiana, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Arkansas, disappear. That's what 14.9 million people looks like. Actually, you'd still have about 1 million more people to be missing from somewhere else. So those are a few statistics. So now let's move to today's second main point, and that is, what does the process look like? So you might be shocked to know that depending upon the state that you live in, not everyone can file a missing persons report. Now, this was the case in Florida, as Gabi Petito, her parents and her residency, her parents lived in New York State, but Gabi lived with Brian and his family in Florida. So because her last known residence, or her residence, was with Brian in Florida, her family in New York couldn't file a police report. They couldn't file her as being missing because his residency was with someone else who was refusing to talk to the police. So when the police went to talk to Brian and Brian's family and they said no comment, they couldn't file a missing persons report, because her family couldn't file a missing persons report because of the state laws and procedures in Florida. So that's a little bit shocking to know. It took 10 days of her not communicating with her family after he returned for the police to finally open a missing persons report. And as we mentioned earlier, you guys know the outcome of that. So Lila McKinley, now she's a legislative fellow for the state of Connecticut, their legislative assembly, and that's part of their state government. She referenced a Texas law in 2017 in a report titled Missing Persons Policies for Texas. Now, in this report, she talks about how Texas's laws, Texas Code 63.004 specifically, says that here in Texas, anyone can file a missing persons report. And we do this to law enforcement. You can do it via in person. You can go by a local police agency. You can do it via the phone. There's actually an online form that you can use that you can create this missing persons report. She does note, however, that it is up to the specific law enforcement agency to decide how to respond and if and when to conduct a search. So there's nothing that says if I file a missing persons report that the police actually have to go search for that person and what time frame that process looks like. And that was an issue of frustration specifically in the Gabi Petito case, and is also an issue of concern for the thousands of people who go missing every day in our country. So she does say that there are a few instances in where there is some leadway to that. So specifically, 2 caveats. If there's an endangered child, then there is a statute in the law that says they have to respond immediately. If it is an adult with dementia or Alzheimer's missing, they have to respond and do that immediately. So those are the 2 caveats. She also notes There is no waiting period. So oftentimes in the movies, you hear people say things like, oh, have they been missing for 24 hours or 48 hours? There is no law in Texas that says that that has to happen. If you have reason to believe someone is missing, you can report them missing at any point in time. If you do that, that actually triggers an Amber Alert. And you've probably all gotten them on your phone sporadically where it beeps and buzzes and you read it and it's like license plate number XYZ missing person. And that's what that is designed to do. So according to the US Department of Justice, now that's the federal agency that oversees all law enforcement in the US. They say that the Amber Alert system was codified into law in 2003. And the alert system really began in 1996 and it has Texas roots. It was in Dallas, Texas, as a result to the kidnapping of 9-year-old Amber Hagerman. And she disappeared one day while riding her bike. And she was later found to have been murdered. And so this system was then put into place and then it spread across the US and is now codified into law as the Amber Alert system. So that takes us to step 3. So last, I want to share with you today some resources on what to do if you suspect someone is missing. So the Harris County Sheriff's Office says a few things. They say, 1, don't panic. Someone may simply have just forgotten their phone, or they may have forgotten to check in with you. So do make sure that that you do give them time to check in. If someone's missing for an hour or 2 hours, they're probably not going to mount any type of response to that if you don't know for sure that they're missing. The second thing they suggest is to contact someone's family and friends and ask if they have seen or heard from the person that you suspect to be missing. It's possible that they've had contact with them, or it's possible that they have knowledge as to their whereabouts. Remember, it isn't illegal for a person to go voluntarily missing. We've had times in our life where we want to get away from people and everything. There's no law that says you got to check in with anybody. So it's not illegal to voluntarily go missing. But if you ever suspect someone is missing and that person is in danger, don't hesitate, reach out and get help and file a missing persons report, especially if someone suffers from mental illness, if you know or suspect them to be in physical or emotional distress, to be victims of physical or emotional abuse, or if they are depressed or suicidal. Time really matters, especially in those instances. So do make sure that you reach out to the authorities and get help. So the police also suggest that if you do file a missing persons report, you're going to need some basic information that you provide to folks. You need to have a photo of them so that they can put that out to help other people identify. You need a date of birth, a physical description of what that person looks like. And then if you have information on the clothing that they were last seen in, or the type of vehicle that they may be driving, etc. Also says that if you suspect foul play, to preserve any video, calls, text, etc., things like that. Don't delete anything that might be useful in helping authorities track down finding this missing person, or in the event that foul play has occurred, something that might be useful in their investigation and prosecution of someone. So in closing, today I've talked about the statistics of missing people and shared with you what that looks like in terms of a yearly basis for our country dating all the way back to 1990. I've also talked about the general process of what it looks like when we report someone missing and what prompts a local law enforcement response and how that response can be very dependent upon where you live. And lastly, I just provided some resources on what to do if you suspect someone is missing. So Gabi Petito's case, as tragic as it is, serves as an opportunity for all of us to learn more about the millions of missing people in our country and the process that is designed to help them. Remember, when in doubt, act. Time is of the essence. Thank you. All right. Oh, wow. I even got some applause from a stranger back there. I love that. Mission accomplished. So what do you guys, I put that together in a few hours for you. In response to the things that we've talked about, what did you see there? What did I demonstrate based off of what we've talked about? And did you think that it made the speech more successful from an audience analysis perspective because it was present.
Well, the attention grabber was great, and the numbering was also like you talked about. So I put that in my notes. Thank you.
So with the statistics, we didn't actually talk about in the lesson, but what I wanted to highlight there was when we throw statistics at people, we need some clarification about what that looks like. So 543,000 people is a lot of people, but then I broke it down. Well, if you're an Astros fan, here's what it would look like. And then also considering, well, maybe some of my audience isn't a sports fan. So let me put it into a different perspective of here's what it would look like based off of people and communities around us. So make your statistics meaningful. What else did you see?
I think sorry if you hear Samson, I think you had a really good flow, and the way you transitioned from each point was like, it made sense. It was really well.
Well, Samson is really going at it back there. Bless his heart. Yeah, so flow matters, how we choose to arrange the information and what information we choose to present. Was it clear that I was transitioning? We talk about transitions and connectives. Was it clear that I was moving from point to point, right? So as an audience member, did that help you feel not necessarily more connected to the material, but did it help you feel like you knew where I was going?
Yeah, it felt cohesive. It felt as if, we were moving along in a structured shape. And how you mentioned the 3 topics in the very beginning, it gave me knowledge as to like where the speech was going.
And that's why that introduction of material is important in the very beginning, because that is the roadmap, right? And if any of you zoned out, as people do, then you might have noticed or not even noticed when you did it. But then when you heard me connect and transition, it gave you that opportunity to come back. So at the end, so I gave you the roadmap, and then I tried to be clear as I moved through the speech. Now I'm talking about 1, 2, or 3. So you knew where I was at. Did you know that I was closing? How did you know that I was closing?
You said about in closing.
Yeah, and that's what's so awesome about it is students often think, that you got to do something special to transition to the closing. You don't. You just simply have to tell people, I'm closing, right? This is it. I'm wrapping it up. You don't need anything fancy, crazy. Just let people know in closing, and it sends that message to them that you are closing. So then also I did something in my closing that I did in my introduction, which was what?
An interesting final thought.
I gave an interesting final thought. Maggie was talking but didn't hear her.
There was
people
in the room. Sorry.
I was just saying, did you restate your thesis? I think you restate.
A restatement of the thesis, and even more specifically, restatement of what?
Yeah, the Gabi case.
Yeah, so I go back to how I started. I brought it back together and tied it in, because knowing that that is something that is interesting to people right now, and then tie it back to that. So I gave you a clear introduction, a clear overview in my introduction. I used transitions and connectives as I presented, so you would know where we were in the process. I gave you a clear in closing to let you know I was wrapping up. And then I tied it back to my intro. And even in tying it back to my intro, did you notice I restated the 3 things that I had told you about? So in the event, at any point you weren't listening, you knew at the end, here's the 3 things that I also talked about. So I told you that in the beginning, I walked you through it, and then I pull you back to it there in the end. And then I use that as an opportunity to try to have a thoughtful, deeper moment, lower my voice, slow down a bit, use that for impact. When we go back, I want you to see if anybody noticed this. When did I introduce myself?
After the what's it called? The attention grabber. It's like a moment after.
Yeah, so we can say, hi, I'm Rick Curry. Today I'm going to talk about XYZ, and that's perfectly fine. Or you can use an attention grabber, get people's attention, and then tell them who you are, like I did today. So there's different ways and techniques that you can use it. But the point of that is introduce yourself. Now, we can see your name on the screen, but we don't know each other. So as a result, you should always just make it a practice to introduce yourself anytime you're speaking. As you start, just make sure you say, hi, I'm XYZ, and you can do that. So I hope that that example was useful for you in comparison to the things that we've talked about today, to sort of let you know how I do things and what I expect of you moving forward and how you can apply that. Check out the module online for this week. Make sure that you do your self-evaluation, watch your video using those 3 things. Okay? Have a great weekend, guys. We'll see you back next Tuesday.
You have a great weekend. Bye.
Thank you.